The emergency beacon erupted from the dying space station like a scream in the darkness, its digital cry for help cutting through the cosmic void with the desperation of 27,000 souls facing extinction. Commander Kyvan's 3 hearts hammered against his chest as another explosion rocked the massive structure, sending tremors through the deck, plating beneath his feet. Acrid smell of burning circuits and leaking coolant filled the air, mixing with the metallic taste of fear that coated his tongue. "Hull breach on levels 7 through 12, shouted his communications officer, her voice barely audible over the shrieking alarms. "Structural integrity at 38% and falling fast." Kyvan gripped the command rail until his knuckles turned white, watching helplessly as red warning lights bathed the bridge in hellish crimson. Through the massive viewing ports, he could see the raider fleets circling like vultures, their black ships bristling with weapons that had already turned 3 of his defensive platforms into expanding clouds of superheated debris. These weren't ordinary pirates looking for a quick score. These were the Crimson Reapers, the butchers who left no survivors, the nightmare that haunted every peaceful world in this sector. But here's the thing about desperation: it makes you try anything, even the impossible. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Galactic Trade Alliance," his tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with barely controlled panic. "The raiders are jamming all standard frequencies. Can't reach anyone." Station groaned like a dying beast as another barrage of plasma fire tore through the outer hull. Somewhere in the residential sectors, families were huddled in emergency shelters, children crying for parents who might never hold them again. The thought hit Kyvan like a physical blow. 27,000 civilians, teachers, engineers, shopkeepers, grandparents telling bedtime stories just hours ago, depending on him to find a miracle. "Then we broadcast on everything," Kyvan roared, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Every frequency, every channel, every communication array we have left. Someone out there has to hear us." The distress signal exploded outward. In all directions, a digital, desperate plea bouncing off asteroid fields and riding solar winds across the galaxy. The message was simple and heartbreaking. "This is Commander Kyvan of Harmony Station. We are under attack by hostile forces. 27,000 civilians require immediate evacuation. Any vessel capable of rendering aid, please respond. We don't have much time." Now, space is a funny thing. It doesn't care about your careful plans or intended recipients. Radio waves don't check addresses before delivery. The signal careened through the cosmic dark, deflecting off magnetic fields and solar storms, taking wild detours through nebulae and around black holes. It should have reached the peaceful merchant worlds of the Alliance, where diplomatic vessels would have immediately begun organizing a careful, measured response that would arrive precisely too late to matter. Instead, it found Earth Captain James Mitchell was reviewing supply reports in his ready room aboard the USS Thunderstrike when the message arrived, the alien symbols dancing across his screen before the translation software kicked in. The coffee mug in his hand stopped halfway to his lips as he read the desperate plea, his weathered face hardening into the expression that had made enemy commanders surrender rather than face him in battle. "You know what they say about humans, we're the species that looked at apex predators and said, 'Hold my beer.'" Mitchell's finger stabbed the come button. "All senior staff to the bridge, now." His voice carried the authority of a man who had stared death in the face so many times they were on a first-name basis. Within 90 seconds, his key officers had assembled, their faces reflecting the same grim determination that had made humanity the most feared and most respected species in their corner of the galaxy. Lieutenant Olivia Parker, his tactical officer, pulled up the stellar cartography display with fingers that trembled slightly from adrenaline. The holographic map showed their position relative to the distress signal, and the news wasn't good. "Sir, that's deep in Reaper territory. These aren't just pirates we're talking about. They're the monsters who turned the colony system into a graveyard. 73 billion people dead, no survivors." The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Everyone knew the statistics. The Crimson Reapers had been terrorizing this sector for 3 years, leaving nothing but empty worlds and floating graveyards in their wake. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They simply killed everything that breathed and moved on to the next target. But here's what the galaxy never understood about humans. We didn't claw our way to the top of Earth's food chain by being reasonable. Distance to target? Asked, his voice steady as granite. 47 light years, sir. At maximum burn, we could be there in 36 hours. Parker's voice carried a mixture of excitement and terror that made her sound younger than her 28 years. Chief Engineer Noah Williams looked up from his damage assessment tablet, his scarred hands steady, despite the magnitude of what they were contemplating, sir. We'd be going in alone. No backup, no support fleet, no cavalry coming to save us if things go sideways. Our escort vessels can't match our speed. They're still 2 days behind us. Mitchell turned to stare out at the starfield beyond the bridge viewports, his reflection ghost-like in the reinforced transparent aluminum. Somewhere out there, families were dying while bureaucrats debated response protocols and measured risks against regulations. Children were crying for parents who might already be dead. The math was simple and brutal by the time any official response could be organized. 27,000 people would be nothing but scattered atoms. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Every officer on the bridge, knowing they were balanced on the knife's edge between heroism and suicide. Then Mitchell turned back to his crew, and they saw something in his eyes that made them straighten unconsciously, the cold fire that had earned him the nickname Iron Jim in the war colleges of 3 different species. "Prep the ship for combat," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Set course for Harmony Station, maximum burn. And send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them, we're about to remind the galaxy why Earth has a quarantine warning." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as his officers rushed to implement orders that would either save 27,000 lives or add their names to the list of humanity's glorious failures. But as Lieutenant Parker's fingers flew over, her console programming jump coordinates that would take them straight into hell, she couldn't help but smile. After all, somebody had called for help, and humans had never been good at ignoring that kind of call. The fabric of space itself seemed to tear apart as the human fleet materialized from hyperspace. Their arrival announced by a thunderclap of displaced matter that shook every ship within 100 kilometers. The USS Thunderstrike led the charge, its hull scarred from a dozen battles, flanked by destroyers whose names struck fear into the hearts of pirates across 3 sectors relentless: Fury's Edge and the appropriately named Problem Solver. These weren't the pristine diplomatic vessels favored by most civilized species. These were warships built by a race that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other before turning their attention to the star's commander. Kyvan's tactical display lit up like a festival as proximity alarms screamed warnings about the new arrivals. His communications officer, a young Altarian named Zeph, turned from her console with wide eyes that reflected the bridge's emergency lighting. "Sir, I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. They're weapons. By the 7 moons, their weapons are registering power levels that should be impossible for ships that size. You know what they say about human engineering? If it doesn't solve the problem, you're not using enough firepower." The Crimson Reapers had been circling Harmony Station like sharks around a wounded seal, taking their time to savor the terror of their victims before delivering the killing blow. These weren't desperate pirates scraping together a living. They were methodical killers who had turned slaughter into an art form. Their flagship, the Bone Harvester, was a kilometer long. Nightmare of black metal and cruel angles, its hull decorated with the ground bones of billions of victims. Captain Vexel had earned his reputation by personally executing the entire population of New Geneva, while their families watched, then using their orbital platforms for target practice. But suddenly, the Predators found themselves face to face with something they'd never encountered before. Pray that bit back. Unknown vessels, Vexel's voice crackled across the communication channels. Dripping with the arrogance of a being who had never met his match, "You are interfering with Reaper operations. Withdraw immediately, or we will demonstrate why the galaxy trembles at our name." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then Captain Mitchell's voice cut through space like a blade forged in the heart of a dying star, each word carrying the weight of humanity's violent history. This is Captain James Mitchell of the Terran Expeditionary Force. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender. Or we will show you why our homeworld carries a quarantine warning and why smart species give us a wide berth. Laughter was like grinding metal. Humans, the galaxy's newest pest, you dare threaten the Crimson Reapers with your primitive? His words died as the human fleet's weapon systems came online. Energy readings spiking beyond anything the Reapers' sensors could properly measure. The destroyers spread out in a formation that looked almost casual until you realized it gave them perfect overlapping fields of fire. It would turn any escape attempt into a shooting gallery. Here's the thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy never quite grasped. We didn't evolve on a nice, peaceful world where cooperation and diplomacy were the keys to survival. We crawled out of a planetary blender that tried to kill us with everything from saber-toothed tigers to ice ages, and we learned to smile while doing it. 20-9, 20-8, Mitchell's countdown continued with the mechanical precision of an execution timer. Commander Kyvan watched from his damaged bridge as the human fighters launched, their sleek forms cutting through space with a grace that defied everything he knew about physics. These weren't the lumbering bombers or careful interceptors favored by civilized militaries. These were death incarnate, piloted by beings who treated aerial combat like a three-dimensional chess game played at relativistic speeds. By the ancestors, whispered his tactical officer, her voice barely audible over the sound of failing life support systems. They're not using standard attack patterns. I can't predict their movement. It's like they're improvising everything in real time. That's when the real show began. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen pulled her fighter into a spiral that would have turned any other pilot into organic paste, laughing as she threaded the needle between two Reaper destroyers while their point defense systems tried desperately to track her impossible trajectory. Thunderbolt leader to all fighters, her voice crackled over the cum, filled with the kind of joy that most species reserve for their wedding day. Let's remind these idiots why Earth is classified as a death world. Time to dance. Human. Pilots attacked with a coordination that seemed telepathic, their fighters weaving through enemy formations like angry hornets, while unleashing devastation that made supernovas look like birthday candles. They pulled maneuvers that violated several laws of physics and at least 3 conventions of civilized warfare, all while maintaining a running commentary that would have been hilarious if it wasn't accompanied by the systematic destruction of one of the galaxy's most feared pirate fleets. Fox 3, on the ugly one with the skull decorations, called out Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez as his missiles found their target. Scratch one, Reaper. Save some for the rest of us, Rodriguez, replied Captain Jennifer Walsh, her fighter executing a barrel roll that took her directly through an enemy ship's explosion. I've got 20 credits riding on my kill count. Commander Kyvan stared in stunned disbelief as his tactical display showed. Impossible things happening with casual regularity. Human fighters were literally flying circles around ships 10 times their size, treating the deadly ballet of space combat like some kind of extreme sport. Their pilots were actually laughing. He could hear it over the open comm channels, laughing while they turned the galaxy's most feared killers into expanding clouds of superheated debris.
Sir?
His communications officer's voice cracked with a mixture of awe and terror. The humans just took out 3 Reaper destroyers in the last 90 seconds. Their casualty count is ... 0. But the real shock came when the countdown reached 0 and the human response shifted from warning to action. The USS Thunderstrike's main batteries opened fire, their energy beams punching through Reaper shields like they were made of tissue paper. The destroyer problem solver lived up to its name by reducing a kilometer-long battlecruiser to its component atoms in a single devastating salvo, and then came the boarding pods. 20-9 seconds after Mitchell's ultimatum expired. Armored projectiles launched from the human ships like bullets from the guns of angry gods. They moved with the inexorable certainty of natural disasters, their trajectory computers plotting intercepts that would drive them through enemy hulls regardless of any evasive maneuvers. The first pod struck the Bone Harvester's command section with the force of a small asteroid, punching through armor that had withstood the firepower of entire battle fleets. Inside that pod, Marine Sergeant Theodore Jackson checked his weapon one final time and grinned behind his helmet's faceplate. After all, someone had called for help. Marines had never been good at taking no for an answer. The galaxy was about to learn why humans called this Tuesday. The bulkhead door exploded inward with a metallic shriek that echoed through the Reaper ship's corridors, like the scream of a dying god. Marine Sergeant Noah Williams stepped through the smoking wreckage, his powered armor making him look like something that had crawled out of humanity's darkest nightmares. 7 feet of black ceramic and reactive steel, bristling with enough weapons to level a city block. The servo motors in his joints whined softly as he moved, and the red glow from his helmet's optical sensors painted the corridor walls in hellish crimson, the alien prisoners cowering in the cargo. Abe took one look at this mechanical demon and prepared to die. But then Williams spoke, and his voice carried the gentle warmth of a father reading bedtime stories to his children. Easy there, folks. Take a deep breath. We're the good guys, and we're here to get you home safe. The contradiction was so jarring it broke something fundamental in how these beings understood the universe. Here stood a creature that could literally tear through starship hulls with his bare hands, speaking with the kind of compassion that most species reserve for their own young. The Catherian family huddled in the corner, parents, clutching 3 small children who couldn't have been more than 10 years old in human terms, stared up at him with expressions that mixed terror and desperate hope in equal measure. You know, what's funny about humans? We're the only species that figured out how to be absolutely terrifying and completely trustworthy at the same time. I know this is scary, Williams continued, his massive armored form kneeling down to put himself at eye level with the children. The gesture should have been impossible, that armor weighed nearly half a ton, but he moved with the fluid grace of a dancer. My name is Noah, and my friends and I are going to make sure nothing bad happens to you ever again. Can you tell me your names? The youngest child, a small Catherian girl with silver skin and enormous violet eyes, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity that seems universal among young beings everywhere. I'm Zira, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of battle. Are you really here to help us? Williams reached out with one massive gauntlet hand, and the child placed her tiny fingers against his palm without hesitation. Cross my heart and hope to die, little one? That's a human promise, and we never break those. Meanwhile, 3 decks up, the contradiction of human nature was playing out on an even more dramatic scale. Dr. Emma Rodriguez had set up an impromptu field hospital in what used to be the Pirates' Trophy Room, a chamber filled with the personal belongings of their victims. Mementos of lives cut short by Reaper brutality. Now it served a different purpose as human medics worked frantically to save the lives of beings they'd never seen before. Rodriguez bent over a small Catherian boy whose breathing came in short, desperate gasps. Falling debris during the battle, his alien physiology was failing in ways that would have baffled any other species' medical personnel. But humans had spent centuries learning to adapt, to improvise, to make miracles happen with whatever tools they had available. Stay with me, sweetheart, she whispered, tears streaming down her face as her enhanced reflexes allowed her to perform surgery at speeds that defied belief. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, guided by neural implants that processed medical data faster than any organic brain could manage. I know it hurts, but you're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay. The boy's parents watched. From across the room, their faces reflecting the same bewildering mix of terror and gratitude that seemed to follow humans wherever they went. They had witnessed these strange beings slaughter their captors with surgical efficiency, then immediately turned that same focused intensity toward healing the wounded with infinite patience and care. But here's what made it even more incredible. Rodriguez had never seen Catherian anatomy before today. She was literally inventing new surgical techniques in real time, using battlefield scanners and pure human stubbornness to fight death itself. When the boy's alien heart stopped beating in a rhythm her equipment couldn't recognize, she simply adapted her approach until she found something that worked. The sound of her patient's first stable breath in over an hour echoed through the makeshift hospital like a choir of angels. Outside the captured ship, the battle continued with a methodical precision that had made humanity the most feared military force in known space. Captain Mitchell stood on his bridge, watching his tactical display update in real time as his fleet systematically dismantled an enemy that had terrorized this sector for 3 years. Thunderbolt Squadron reporting, came Lieutenant Commander Chen's voice over the comm, casual as if she were discussing the weather instead of the total destruction of a pirate armada. We've got the last 3 Reaper destroyers cornered near the asteroid field. Should we take prisoners or just finish them? Mitchell's smile was colder than the space between stars. Yes, take prisoners. I want someone left alive to spread the word about what happens when you threaten civilians in human space. The final phase of the battle lasted exactly 14 minutes. The remaining Reaper ships, seeing their flagship captured and their fleet reduced to burning wreckage, attempted to scatter and escape. It was a reasonable tactical decision that might have worked against any other opponent. But humans had turned pursuit into an art form. The destroyers, relentless in fury's edge, moved to cut off the escape routes with the coordinated precision of wolves hunting in a pack. Their captains, Rodriguez and Jackson, respectively, had been friends since the Naval Academy and could anticipate each other's moves with almost telepathic accuracy. When the fleeing pirates tried to use the asteroid field as cover, they found themselves herded into a killing zone where human weapons could pick them off with surgical precision. The final score flashed across Mitchell's tactical display in stark, unforgiving numbers: 25 Reaper vessels destroyed, 8 captured intact for intelligence gathering, and exactly 0 human casualties. It wasn't just a victory, it was a demonstration of why smart species gave Earth a wide berth, and why the few that had tried to conquer humanity were now footnotes in history books. But the real miracle was happening in the spaces between the battles. In the quiet moments where human medics worked to save lives while human engineers restored power to damaged life support systems, Commander Kyvan, still aboard his crippled station, watched through security cameras as these strange beings from a quarantined world moved through his corridors with the focused intensity of guardian angels. They didn't just rescue people, they restored hope, and in the deepest parts of the captured Reaper ships, where the pirates had kept their most valuable prisoners, Marine Sergeant Williams was keeping his promise to a small Catherian girl named Zira. He carried her on his shoulders as they walked toward the transport shuttles, her laughter echoing through corridors that had never heard such a sound before. After all, someone had called for help, and humans had never been good at doing things halfway. The twisted wreckage of Harmony Station's docking bay looked like something that had been chewed up and spat out by a mechanical giant. Plasma burns scarred the walls in abstract patterns that told the story of a desperate battle while severed. Power conduits sparked intermittently like dying nerve endings. The main docking clamps had been reduced to molten slag by Reaper weapons, and the atmospheric containment fields flickered weakly, barely maintaining the pressure differential that kept 27,000 people breathing. Chief Engineer Theodore Jackson crawled through the maintenance tunnels with the single-minded determination of a man who had never met a problem he couldn't solve with enough creative cursing and applied stubbornness. His toolkit consisted of spare parts cannibalized from 3 different ship classes, a plasma welder held together with military-grade duct tape, and 30 years of experience making miracles happen with whatever junk happened to be lying around. "Come on, you beautiful bastard," he muttered to the jury-rigged power coupling he was installing, sweat dripping from his forehead despite the station's failing environmental systems. "I've coaxed life out of worse scrap heaps than you.
Ow.
Don't you dare fail me now."
Ow.
You know what they say about human engineers? Give them a paperclip and some determination, and they'll rewire the universe. The coupling sparked once, twice, then settled into the steady hum that meant success. Jackson allowed himself exactly 3 seconds of satisfaction before moving on to the next impossible task. 27,000 people were counting on him to work miracles, and Jackson had built his career on never disappointing people who needed him most. Above him in the station's command center, Commander Kyvan watched his damage control boards slowly shift from red to yellow as human engineering teams worked their impossible magic throughout his dying station. These beings seemed to view mechanical failure as a personal insult. attacking broken systems with the same focused intensity they had brought to the battle against the Reapers. Sir, his communications officer reported, her voice filled with wonder. The humans have restored power to sections 12 through 18. They're also somehow managing to boost our life support output by 40% using equipment I don't recognize. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, the human engineer leading the life support restoration team, would have laughed if she'd heard that comment. The equipment in question was a modified coffee maker from the USS Thunderstrike's galley, rewired to serve as a backup atmospheric processor. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. And in her experience, working was all that mattered when people's lives were on the line. But the real miracle was happening in the evacuation zones, where the contradiction of human nature was on full display. These same beings who had just finished turning a feared pirate fleet into expanding clouds of superheated gas were now moving through the station's corridors with the gentle patience of kindergarten teachers shepherding nervous children. Marine Sergeant Michael Connor, whose powered armor had been designed to strike terror into the hearts of humanity's enemies, found himself kneeling beside an elderly vexnary couple who were too frail to walk to the evacuation shuttles. His voice, filtered through his suit's external speakers, carried the warm reassurance of a grandson talking to his grandparents. "Don't you worry about a thing," he said softly, his massive gauntleted hands carefully lifting the ancient male, while his partner, Corporal Jessica Hayes, gently scooped up the female. "We're going to take real good care of you. My grandmother always said that showing respect to your elders was the mark of a civilized being." The elderly Vexnari female looked up at Hayes with eyes that had seen 8 decades of life, her weathered face creased with lines that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. "You are so very young," she whispered in accented standard, "yet you risk everything for people you do not know." Hayes paused in her careful progress toward the shuttle bay, and for a moment the hardened Marine disappeared, replaced by a 24-year-old woman from Nebraska who still called her mother every Sunday, because that's what decent people do, she said simply. "We help when we can." The evacuation proceeded with the organized chaos that seemed to characterize everything humans did. They moved through the station like a force of nature, simultaneously gentle and unstoppable, carrying children who giggled at their mechanical voices while supporting adults who wept with relief at their salvation. There was something profoundly moving about watching these armored giants treat each evacuee as if they were the most precious cargo in the universe. Commander Kyvan found himself drawn to the main evacuation staging area, where Captain Mitchell was personally overseeing the operation. The human captain stood amid the controlled chaos like a calm center in a storm, his weathered face reflecting the kind of quiet competence that came from decades of making life and death decisions under pressure. Here's what struck Kyvan most about this: Sion Mitchell wasn't directing the operation from some remote command post. He was down in the thick of it, helping elderly civilians into shuttle seats, reassuring frightened children, and personally ensuring that every single evacuee was accounted for. This was a man who commanded one of the most powerful battle fleets in known space, yet he was taking time to tie a small Altarian girl's shoes because her parents were too injured to do it themselves. "Captain Mitchell," Kyvan said as he approached, his voice heavy with exhaustion and something that might have been reverence. "I need to ask you something." Mitchell looked up from the evacuation manifest he was reviewing, his blue eyes holding depths of experience that spoke of horrors survived and battles won. There were lines around those eyes that told stories of sleepless nights and impossible decisions, but also a warmth that suggested he had never lost sight of why those battles were worth fighting. "What's on your mind, Commander?" Kyvan struggled to find words for the question that had been eating at him since the human fleet first appeared. Around them, the evacuation continued with mechanical precision as human soldiers guided his people to safety with infinite care. "Why?" he finally managed, his voice breaking with emotion. "Why risk everything for strangers? Your people don't know us. We have no alliance, no treaty, no obligation to each other. You could have ignored our distress call and no one would have blamed you." Mitchell's expression softened, and for a moment the hardened military commander disappeared, replaced by something more fundamental, a decent man trying to explain something that seemed so obvious to him that he had never really thought about it before. "'Cause someone called for help," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. That's all we needed to know. The words hit Khyven like a physical blow, not because they were profound or eloquent, but because they were so utterly, genuinely human. Here was a species that the galaxy had labeled as dangerous Deathworlders, as creatures to be feared and avoided, and their defining characteristic wasn't their capacity for violence, it was their inability to ignore suffering. But the risk, Khyven pressed, gesturing toward the damaged station around them. You could have lost your ships, your crews. For all you knew, this could have been a trap. Mitchell's smile was tired but genuine. Commander, my people have a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Right. We've never been good at doing nothing when people need help. As if to emphasize his point, a young human medic rushed past. Them carrying a Catherian infant who couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The baby was crying a sound that apparently translated across all species, and the medic was making soft cooing noises while bouncing gently to soothe the frightened child. These were the monsters the galaxy feared. These were the most decent beings Khyven had ever met. And in 6 hours, they had accomplished the impossible. The final evacuation shuttle launched from Harmony Station's docking bay with barely 20 seconds to spare, its engines straining against the gravitational pull of a space station that was literally tearing itself apart. Commander Khyven pressed his face against the viewport, watching his home of 15 years begin its final death throes as cascading system. Failures triggered the inevitable reactor overload. The station's superstructure buckled with a grinding roar that seemed to echo through the vacuum itself. Massive support beams snapping like twigs as internal pressure waves tore through corridors. Where children had played just hours before, emergency lights flickered across the hall in random patterns like the dying neurons of a mechanical brain. Before darkness claimed section after section in a spreading wave of finality, then the reactor went. Critical. The explosion was beautiful, in the way that only cosmic destruction can be, a brief new star blazing to life where Harmony Station had once stood, its nuclear fire painting the surrounding space in brilliant shades of gold and silver. The shockwave raced outward at the speed of light, harmless now to the 27,000 souls who watched from the safety of human transport ships, their faces pressed against viewports as they witnessed the transformation of their former prison into temporary glory. Not one life had been lost to the evacuation. Not one. You know what's amazing about humans? We're the only species that can turn a complete disaster into a victory just by refusing to give up on people. Captain Mitchell stood on the bridge of the USS Thunderstrike, watching the expanding fireball through tactical displays that couldn't quite capture the emotional weight of what they had accomplished. His crew moved around him with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had just pulled off the impossible, their faces reflecting the same mixture of exhaustion and pride that follows any job well done. All civilians accounted for, sir, reported Lieutenant Parker, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a woman who had helped coordinate the most complex evacuation in recorded galactic history. Medical teams report 347 injured, but all are stable and responding to treatment. No fatalities. Mitchell nodded, allowing himself a moment of quiet satisfaction before the weight of command settled back onto his shoulders. Around him, his fleet was already preparing for departure, fuel topped off, weapons systems checked, damage reports filed in triplicate. They had accomplished their mission with the methodical precision that had made human military forces legendary throughout known space. But this wasn't just about military efficiency. This was about something deeper, something that defined what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had forgotten how to hope. The communication request came through just as the fleet was preparing to jump to hyperspace. Commander Khyven's face appeared on the main screen, his expression carrying the shell-shocked look of someone whose entire worldview had been fundamentally altered in the span of a single day. Captain Mitchell Khyven began, his voice steady. Despite the emotional weight of everything he had witnessed, before you depart, I need to say something. Our government will undoubtedly want to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth, your species. You're nothing like what the warnings claimed. Here's where most civilized species would have launched into a diplomatic speech about mutual cooperation, and peaceful coexistence. But humans have never been good at following scripts. Mitchell's laugh carried warmth that could melt glaciers. The sound of genuine amusement mixed with something deeper, the recognition of a fundamental truth that most beings preferred to avoid. Oh, we're exactly what the warnings claimed, Commander. We're dangerous, unpredictable, and we solve most problems with controlled violence applied in creative ways. The difference is that we're dangerous to the right people. The statement hung in space between them like a challenge, forcing Khyven to confront the paradox that defined humanity's place in the galaxy. These beings were everything the quarantine warnings suggested: violent, aggressive, utterly unpredictable in their responses to threats. But they were also the most decent creatures he had ever encountered. Mitchell's expression grew serious, his voice taking on the weight of absolute conviction. Someone once told us that strength without compassion is just brutality, but compassion without strength is just weakness. We choose to be both strong and kind, even when the galaxy tells us we have to pick one or the other. The words carried the accumulated wisdom of a species that had clawed its way up from planetary predators to interstellar guardians. Learning along the way that true civilization wasn't about avoiding violence, it was about using that violence to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Khyven stared at the human captain for a long moment, processing implications that would reshape his understanding of the universe. "The galaxy has spent decades fearing you," he said quietly. "But perhaps we should have been hoping for you instead." Mitchell's smile was gentle but carried an edge of steel that spoke to the reality of human nature. "Fear and hope aren't mutually exclusive, Commander. Smart people fear what we can do to our enemies. Smart people also hope that when the monsters come calling, we'll be the bigger monsters standing in their way." As the human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, something fundamental shifted in the way the universe worked. News of the rescue spread through subspace communication networks with the speed of gossip and the impact of revelation. 27,000 rescued civilians told their stories to anyone who would listen, and those stories spread like wildfire through civilized space. The Altarian news networks led with footage of human marines carrying alien children to safety. The Catherian diplomatic corps issued statements about humanity's unprecedented display of interspecies compassion. Even the notoriously xenophobic Vexnari Council released a grudging acknowledgement that perhaps Earth's quarantine status needed to be reconsidered. But the real change happened in the quiet moments, in the conversations between individuals who had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of civilization. Children who had been carried to safety by armored giants would grow up telling stories about the day angels came from the Deathworld. Parents who had watched human medics fight to save alien lives would never again believe that compassion was a sign of weakness. The USS Thunderstrike and her escorts vanished into hyperspace with the casual efficiency that characterized everything humans did, leaving behind a void that somehow felt larger than the space they had occupied. Commander Khyven stared out at the stars where the human fleet had been, already missing their presence in ways he couldn't quite articulate. His communications officer broke the silence with a quiet observation that would be quoted in history. "Books for generations to come, sir. I think we just witnessed the moment the galaxy changed." She was right. Word spread through civilized space like a revelation. Earth's children had answered an alien distress call meant for others, and in doing so, had redefined what it meant to be civilized. They had proven that strength and compassion weren't opposite ends of a spectrum. They were two sides of the same coin, and humanity had mastered the art of spending both currencies with equal skill. The galaxy would soon learn that while humans were indeed from a death world, they brought something more valuable than weapons. They brought hope wrapped in righteous fury, delivered by beings who had never learned the difference between can't and won't when lives hung in the balance. After all, someone had called for help, and humans had never been good at ignoring that kind of call. The end.